Welcome in to another episode of Frogs Insider. Jamie Plunkett here. This is a mailbag episode, so it's just yours truly. No Melissa Treebwasser today. She'll be back next week as we do our normal weekly episode. But it's been a minute since I've done one of these over at hornfrogblitz.com, answering some questions from folks on the board. So I thought I'd hop in. It's a fun time of year with spring camp wrapping up for football. Basketball offseason seems to be in full swing. Baseball is entering the final 13 games of the season, which is roughly a quarter of the year. So it's a good time, I thought, to hop on and to just answer some questions, have a little conversation with folks about what's going on in the life of TCU athletics. So that's what we're going to do today. Before we get down that road too far, though, I do want to say a big thank you to Dave Campbell's Texas Football, our partner for this program. We are a part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Republic of Football Network. You can find those shows wherever you get your podcasts. So just on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you might get yours, just search Republic of Football Network. You'll see the feed pop up. You'll get all of our Frogs Insider shows along with shows for every other D1 school in the state of Texas. Pretty cool. There's Baylor, there's Tech, but there's also UTSA and Rice and Sam Houston State. So if you want to learn more about those programs, the Republic of Football Network is truly the best place to go because you have experts on all of those teams in one feed. You'll be one of the smartest people when it comes to talking D1 football in the state of Texas if you subscribe to Republic of Football Network. There's no doubt in my mind about that. If that feels a little overwhelming to have all of those shows in one feed for you, you can just get all of the Frogs Insider content by searching for Frogs Insider wherever you get your podcasts, and it'll just be a feed of our content, exclusively TCU content, if that's the way you prefer it. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the YouTube channel, which is very close to a small milestone, 300 subscribers. We're about 10 away at the time of recording this. So if you haven't hopped over to the Frogs Insider YouTube channel yet and hit the subscribe button, go ahead and do that. You'll see a video pinned to the front of that page. It's my recent interview with Emmanuel Miller, where he and I sat down one-on-one for a conversation about his time at TCU. Really enjoyed that conversation. If you want to go and give that a watch. Such a special guy, such a special player for TCU basketball. But beyond that, I mean, I can't think of a guy who has represented TCU better over the last several seasons than Emmanuel Miller. He's just been so tremendous for the university and for the men's basketball program. So go ahead and give that interview a like and follow the YouTube channel. And make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. Also, a big thank you to our sponsor for the show, Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods. I can't speak highly enough about what the guys over there are doing. I mean, some of the best TCU branded merchandise that I've seen on the market, from hats to hoodies to polos. They got koozies. They've got some other kind of game day paraphernalia. I mean, just anything you need for a TCU game day, you can get that at Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods. So hellshalfacresg.com is the place to go for that. There's a little box that allows you to leave a note when you're making a purchase. Just drop in that you heard about them from Frogs Insider, or the Frogs Insider sent you over there. Just let them know that we appreciate them and their sponsorship of this podcast. I think that's about it. Let's jump right in. So I've broken out all of the questions. First of all, I guess, backing up, when I collect questions, I go over to hornfrogblitz.com where I write alongside Jeremy Clark, and I will drop a thread on the board and just say, hey, guys, I'm doing a mailbag episode. Drop your questions in. So if you want to get a question on a mailbag episode of Frogs Insider, all you've got to do is go over to Hornfrog Blitz and wait for one of those threads to pop up, and boom, you can drop your questions in. I'll talk about them live on the show, and we'll go from there. Today, we got a good number of questions. I have broken them out into 4 buckets. One is kind of like the general questions, not necessarily related to any specific sport. We've got some football questions, we've got some baseball questions, we've got some basketball questions. So I've kind of lumped them all together so we can just talk about football and answer all those questions, then we'll move on to baseball, then we'll move on to hoops. after that. But first, before we get into the sports specific ones, there were a couple questions that I thought were really interesting. First is from Ultimate Frog, who's and I'm paraphrasing here, who's had the most challenging 2023-2024 season out of the big three sports at TCU? Is it Dykes, is it Dixon, or is it Saarloos? And I think it's been an interesting season to be so closely following TCU athletics, just because there have been so many downs. It feels like football missing a bowl, going 5-7, basketball really struggling down the stretch and getting bounced in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Baseball, I mean, we've talked at length on the board. I've written so much about it and talked on this podcast about the challenges that TCU baseball has gone through this year, from the pitching early on really struggling and the defense struggling early on, to the hitting the last month of the season has just been really not up to standard for that program. And so it's an interesting thought to ask who has actually had the more challenging season. I think at this point, I'd say probably basketball has had the least challenging season, simply because they matched their best record ever in the Big 12, which was 9-9. I know that there's been a lot of conversation about why haven't they had a winning record in the Big 12. That's for another day. But in the context of what has happened this season for TCU athletics, I'd say men's basketball has had a pretty good year. I mean, they made the tournament for the third time in a row, which is the first time that's ever happened in program history. They finished 500 in Big 12 play. No, they didn't finish as high as folks wanted. They didn't finish as high as I had projected them to finish. I had them 5th in the Big 12. I think they've ended up, 8th? Something like that, 7th. But I'd say, comparatively speaking, when you talk about TCU football not making a bowl, right, losing 7 games, losing to Colorado to open the year, losing to Texas Tech in a game you probably should have won, getting absolutely boat raced by Kansas State, and just having a pretty significant fall off from a 2022 year where you made the college football playoff and reached the national championship. I think basketball would rank higher than football this year as far as least challenging goes. So football's season, I think, was worse than basketball's in that regard. It's hard to judge baseball because it's not over yet. But I think it would probably be in between football and basketball for right now, as far as how hard the season has been. If we get to 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, whenever the season ends, and baseball doesn't qualify for the Big 12 tournament, then I think we start to have a conversation about, was this a harder season for baseball than it was for football? Missing a bowl game is one thing. Not qualifying for a 10-team league tournament is completely different, especially when you consider the fact that TCU was the overall, by a landslide favorite to win the Big 12 this year. And I think that context is important too. To go from preseason favorite to currently 11th in the conference standings and at risk of not making the conference tournament at all, is a sign that things have not gone the way anyone has expected. And so that's kind of challenging, I think, for TCU at this point. My headphones are all wonky here. Hang on. There we go. That feels better. Okay. All right. Sorry, if you're on the YouTube channel right now, you're just seeing me squish my headphones onto my head a little bit harder because they're feeling a little crazy. That's a good question though, Ultimate, and I think it helps us kind of provide break down the silos, I guess, of how we've looked at TCU athletics this year and how we've looked at the individual performances of each of these programs and coaches and players to say, in the grand scheme of things, kind of where does everything stack up? I like that question. Hopefully in the next iteration of that question, next season, we're talking about who had the best year, right? I think it's safe to say that none of those 3 teams fully met expectations or have to this point in their season. So hopefully next year we're having the opposite conversation where, man, everyone kind of outpaced what we were hoping for and expecting. Who ended up having the best season? That's my hope for next year, is that we're having the inverse of this current conversation. Wrist Explosion asks, what are you planning for late May and June if and when there's no baseball? That's a great question. The off-season is a good time for vacation. I will say that. Family and I are going out of town a couple times over the summer. My wife is a teacher. My kids are obviously in school, so summertime is the best time to get away. We'll be doing that. But as far as content is concerned, content never sleeps. As soon as baseball ends, there's a lot that happens in the summer for baseball as far as portal recruiting goes, locking in your high school class. TCU baseball has a fantastic 2024 class coming in, 25 class coming in, and so they'll nail that down, and then they'll hit the portal hard. It's there's no rest for the weary when it comes to college athletics these days, as Sonny Dykes, Jamie Dixon, and Kirk Sarlos will all tell you. The calendar is chaotic. It is year round, and it's getting more and more challenging, I think, to be a coach at the collegiate level. But they're also well compensated to do that. So, there's that as well. Other content, I've had this idea for a couple of years now where I've wanted to go back and do some kind of narrative storytelling of big moments throughout TCU athletics. It is a project that I was going to do over at Frogs Today, but not there anymore. So it's something that I might pick back up this summer. If you ever watched the SB Nation kind of moment in time, big moments in sports series that they did, where they would take a specific play or a specific moment in a game, and they would do an entire show, 30 minutes or so, around that moment, everything that led up to that moment, and just talk about why it was so important. I've had a desire to do something similar with TCU athletics for a while. I've got 3 or 4 of those shows kind of mapped out. It's just a matter of finding the time to really sit down and edit them the way that I want, record everything. I go back and forth on, do I just kind of narrate this whole thing and let it play out, or do I go to the trouble of interviewing people and cutting it all together? Because obviously that's like a whole another layer and level of effort and work that needs to go into it, which also means that they probably don't all happen this summer, but maybe they happen over the next 18, 24 months or something like that. So that's kind of a peek into the window there. And obviously over at Horned Frog Blitz, we're going to have a ton of content going up as we get ready for football season in August. And hopefully as men's basketball kind of fills out their roster, women's hoops fills out their roster, and baseball starts to hit the portal whenever their season wraps up as well. So with the podcast will still be around. We'll probably do a mailbag once or twice over the summer as well, and then some other kind of fun stuff that will be freed up to do because there aren't actually any sports going on as well. Hyperfrog asks, do you have any backstory on NIL negotiations? For example, have you heard about us offering X, another team offering more, and another team coming over the top and offering more than that? Can you offer any insight on how NIL dealings really go versus how we think they go? Is NIL as big a deal as we think it is in landing players? Okay, so I don't have any specific instances where I can say like this player was offered X, Y, and Z, and then this other school countered, and so they went there, or TCU matched, so they came here. I don't have any of that for you guys, but I do have a general sense of how NIL operates, and it does feel, I think, more like free agency than people expect. So, Hyper, to start with your last question first, is NIL as big of a deal as we think it is in landing players? For most, I would say yes. And there are kids who that's not as big of a deal. They don't bring it up in recruitment, or they don't make it a priority for their recruitment. I think that club is shrinking. And realistically, you can't blame kids for wanting that to be a big part of the conversation because it is so prevalent now. And realistically, the percentages of these kids that are going to go on and play this sport for a living professionally and be able to make a living off of it is really small. And so I'm totally okay with kids prioritizing their own profitability right now and saying, I don't know what my future holds professionally in this sport, but I know that I can make X right now playing this game. I'm going to try and do that. And if there's a school that's willing to pay me that, great. If there's a school that's willing to pay me more than that, even better. So that's it. It is a big deal. Schools have completely changed how they recruit kids. And when I say how they recruit kids, I mean 10 years ago, you would get a kid on campus and you would talk about facilities and you would talk about brand and you would talk about, look, this is how we can get you to the league. You're going to be in facilities that are top of the line, state of the art, best in the country. Think about our brand. We win titles. We compete for national championships. We compete for conference championships every year. We want you to be a part of that. Come build your brand and legacy here in that way. But realistically now, the pitch is, here's how being a member of this institution, being a student athlete here, can impact your brand positively so that you can make money. They talk a lot about NIL and name, image, and likeness. There are opportunities to get a lot more insight on, what that NIL could look like for them. And this is every school having these conversations with kids of like, hey, kind of here's what we're thinking as far as NIL for you. And then, they get on campus, they talk with, and once they're on campus and they have the conversations with the collectives and all that kind of stuff, then that all of those details even get more hammered out after that. Let's see. Have you heard insight into how NIL dealings really go versus how we think they go? So this is an example that I heard the other day that was not related to TCU. So I feel more comfortable kind of talking about it anonymously in that way. But this was a deal with a kid who, not going to say the sport, but it was a kid who was talking with 3 schools primarily. And it wasn't the kid actually talking with these schools. Very rarely is it ever the actual student athlete who's having these conversations. They have an agent or they have a family member who kind of runs those conversations for them, who coordinates all of those conversations with staff, and with other folks that have responsibilities within NIL for universities. And this particular instance, there were 2 NIL offers, for lack of a better word, that were very similar. The kid decided on one of those offers because there was a car involved. And when he went back to a third school who he had been talking with and hadn't seen an NIL offer with yet, kind of said, hey, this is kind of where I am. I'd really like to be at Y instead of X. The third school said, great, okay, we can absolutely do that for you. And so he ends up committing to this third school, and he gets on campus, and then he sits down and he has a conversation with the members of the collective, and his NIL offer is not close to what the other 2 schools were. And there's some frustration there about kind of feeling misled. And how do we go about kind of rectifying that? I think that at this point is still kind of an outlier story. I think most schools have worked in good faith and are honest with student athletes before and when they get on campus about, hey, this is how we've kind of evaluated you, and this is what we think your value is. And then they have the money in the bank and they go and they pay that kid that money. But I think that for as long as there are these, for as long as there are a lack of real guardrails from the NCAA, there are always going to be those schools and those collectives that either talk, either make a promise before they have the money, and get a kid on campus and then realize that they can't pay, or the checks start bouncing. There are schools where checks are starting to bounce. Not at TCU, but there are other schools where checks are starting to bounce, and you can probably glean some of those schools based on what kids are hitting the portal these days. It is completely unregulated, to kind of talk generally again. NIL dealings are largely unregulated. There is no standard protocol. There is no right and wrong way, or the NCAA has handed down to schools, hey, this is the preferred method for handling NIL. And that has let schools really kind of just determine for themselves what works best for them, which in some ways is good, but in other ways allows institutions and certain people operating those collectives to, not have some of the best practices out there. And I think that it's getting to a point where student athletes need more security from the NCAA in order to know that they're operating in good faith with the institutions that they're talking with. It is absolutely crazy. Some of the stories that I've heard is absolutely crazy. Some of the things that are going on. And it all started from a point of, the right mindset of saying these players need to get paid, and they do need to get paid, but how they're getting paid and how organizations go about doing that in good faith with the kid instead of trying to take advantage of a kid for their athletic ability. All that is, I think, going to come to a head pretty quickly here. And, I think I wrote over at Horned Frog Blitz a couple of months ago, back in February, we had a chance to sit down with Jeremiah Donati at TCU and get his insight into NIL and some of the court cases that are happening at the national level that are going to dictate over the next few years how players get paid, whether or not players are going to be considered employees, whether or not they're going to get revenue sharing, all that kind of stuff. And I, as a person who covers TCU, really appreciated his transparency when it came to that conversation. I thought he was very straightforward about what's, taking up most of his time as far as preparing for the future. And he said pretty much, straightforward, like, hey, it would be foolish to think that revenue sharing is not going to be a part of this down the road. So he's already planning for when that's going to be the case. I think his way of forward thinking and being prepared is going to set TCU up really, really well for whatever comes next as far as paying players goes. But the reality is that there are other schools who I don't think are preparing as well. There are other organizations out there that I don't think are gonna be as well prepared. Just to put it that way. So I think TCU fans in that sense should feel really good about how their leadership is approaching whatever is coming next as far as player compensation goes, because I really truly think that Donati has the right approach when it comes to that. Will TCU ever have the biggest NIL budget? Probably not, but I think they're going to be able to, because of the way that they're going about planning and being organized. They're going to be able to make the most of it, and they're going to do right by the student athletes, which of course is the most important part. Let's jump in to some football questions here. We're going to start with Frog. As of May 1st, portal close, what is your prediction for number of Frogs to leave the team and enter the portal? How would you allocate your guesstimate on offense and defensive side of the ball? I'm just going to read all of his questions. He's got a few. On the flip side, how many do we add by the start of fall camp or whatever date is appropriate? I'm expecting a net negative number given we are over the limit. Okay, so first of all, the NCAA just ruled, kind of modified their portal rules. So when May 1st comes around and the transfer portal closes, what that means is that nobody new will be able to enter the transfer portal. Doesn't mean that guys in the portal have to be committed by May 1st. Just means that nobody new can go in. That's been the rule. The new change, though, is that graduate transfers are no longer exempt from the portal window timeline. It used to be if you were a graduate transfer, you didn't have to be in the portal by a certain date. You could enter whenever you wanted. You could commit to another school whenever you wanted. You had a lot more freedom. That's going away. Those transfers now have to abide by the normal transfer window rules. Excuse me. Now for TCU, they've seen two guys hit the portal. Obviously, Dominic Williams was the big one. Champ Lewis is another guy that has hit the portal as well, defensive back for TCU. I know that TCU probably wants to address a need or two on the team, and I'll say it this way: I have not heard of any other players who are itching to hit the portal for TCU. I have not heard that. I have not heard of any guys who are unhappy with NIL on the current roster. I have not heard of any guys who are itching to leave. But you never know. You never know by the end of spring camp, because at the end of spring camp, what the coaching staff does is they're going to sit down, they're going to have a conversation, they're going to be honest with guys about, hey, here's kind of what we see your role as being here. It happens in every sport at every institution across the country. And it's an opportunity for a player to fully understand kind of where they are on the depth chart as far as their role goes, how much playing time they can probably expect to get. And it gives them the opportunity to say, is that a role that I want? Do I want to go try and find something else? So the football coaches are going to be having those conversations with players probably starting on Sunday, Monday, after the spring game, to say, here's kind of what we're feeling, here's kind of what we're thinking, giving that kid an opportunity if they want to hop in the portal to do that. So is it realistic to say that we might see one or two go after those conversations? I think so. Do I know who those guys are going to be, or am I going to try and predict that? No, because I have no idea at this point what those conversations are going to look like. Some inklings based on what's happened so far in spring ball, but I tend to just let those chips fall where they may, as far as guys leaving the program, because everyone's trying to do what's best for them at that point, and I can't, or I can get on board with that. I'm not going to criticize the kid for that. How many do we add? Well, kind of like you said there, Frog. It's dependent on numbers, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if they brought a couple guys in. And to kind of get to the next question here with Mantikos, what are the three biggest areas of need or concern on the team? Offensive line, defensive line, somewhere else. I think right now, the most common sense add would probably be along the offensive line. I just think another interior lineman would be really helpful. Maybe an additional tackle would be really helpful. I know Cade Bennett is coming in the summer, the San Diego State guy. He's not here yet. But I'm getting the sense that they want another offensive lineman. And I agree. I think having another body there would be good. I think most coaches, and Sonny has said this a bunch of times, he really wants 8 guys that he feels good about. I get the sense he's really feeling good about 6, maybe 7 at this point, and bringing in another body to get to that 8 or 9 number, I think would go a long way to addressing the offensive line, because frankly, the offensive line has had an up and down spring. The defensive line, this new DL 4 down front under Andy Avalos has played really, really well for the majority of spring. We've seen a lot of guys step up into new roles, into bigger roles. The stud position on the edge of the line has been creating a ton of havoc, and I think that has been good for TCU to, hey, we're getting the install going, and the defense is looking good. But I think it's also opened eyes to say, hey, maybe we need to bring in another body on the offensive line, just to have a little bit more offensive line competition going into the fall. Obviously, defensive line, with the loss of Dominic Williams, you're probably going to be looking in the portal for a guy. to come and fill that kind of interior spot on the line, one of those interior spots. But I know that they like Marcus Steele. I know that, Tymon Mitchell has been running with the ones and has looked really good. They've moved Caleb Fox inside. They have a little bit of depth there, and I'll be curious to see if they go out and get somebody or if they just kind of ride with who they've got and say, we're going to let these guys get as many reps as possible to be ready for the fall, because we believe in their talent, we believe in their ability, and we would rather them get the reps so that when we get into the fall, they're as prepared as they can possibly be to contribute. So I could see them going either way there. I mean, when it comes to other areas of need, I think they're pretty full up at wide receiver. Defensive backs feels as full of a room. The corner and safety those rooms feel pretty full at this point. Running back is probably one where you wouldn't be so upset to see them add someone. I mean, Cam Cook has looked really good this spring. I think the further and further away Trey Sanders gets from his car accident, the better he's going to be on the field, the more productive he's going to be. You got a couple freshmen in there. Nate Palmer has gotten some good reps in this spring as well. But I think that maybe running back is probably one of the bigger question marks as far as position groups goes. And so I would say probably offensive line and running back would make the most sense to me if TCU were to go out and get somebody. Let's see. Ultimate Frog. Dominic Williams. It's a question about Dominic Williams. Like I said earlier, man, I can't blame a kid for going and getting paid. I cannot do it. I can't find it within me to be upset at a kid for doing what every grown-up in America across the globe wants to do, which is find a bigger paycheck, which is find a situation where you feel better about what you're doing, where you're doing it, and how much you're getting paid. Like I'm not gonna drag a kid for that. I'm just not gonna criticize a kid for doing that. And I know that it's upsetting, right? Like, he was the best defensive lineman on the team. There are no two ways about that. He's the best defensive lineman in the last 2 years. He started all of his games as a true freshman on a team that went to the national championship. I mean, there is a reason the coaching staff stayed on the phone with him to get him to sign to TCU for as long as they did. And he gave a great 2 years to TCU, and I think Frog fans should be thankful for that, and just move on. Right, the kid's going and finding a spot where he feels he's going to be compensated for what he's worth, and I can't blame a kid for that. TRF 51. What do you think the two biggest needs are in the portal for the football team? Kind of just talked about it. Offensive line and running back, I think, are the two where I would be most interested to see if they go out and bring somebody in to compete in those two areas specifically. Well, I guess with offensive line, you feel pretty solid at tackle. There's some injury concerns with Bless Harris. An offensive lineman. Go get an offensive lineman. Maybe a running back. But I really do feel like the roster is in good shape right now for TCU. I truly believe that. Life of a Frog. Loaf asks, I'm curious, or it is really more of a comment, I think. I'm curious of how the football team has been utilizing the new in-helmet communications this spring and how they will implement it in the fall. Seems like it won't benefit schools that play fast all that much. I think it will benefit schools that play at all tempos. Loaf, you know as much about football as anybody on the board, though, so correct me if you think I'm off base here. But I think just however you can streamline the communication between the play caller and the quarterback is a good thing, especially if you want to go fast, without having to deal with three guys throwing up panels of pictures of fast food restaurants and celebrities with other guys throwing out crazy hand signals and, looking over the sideline 3 or 4 times to get a call in. If you just hear it in your ear, say they get the first down and boom, that triggers a want to go fast, go to tempo. Cool. You get that first down. As the quarterback's running up to the spot, the call's in his ear. He can hear the call and is not looking at the sideline to try and get the call, but instead relaying the call from his ear to his teammates, to me, that streamlines the process and allows you to go even faster if that's something that you want to do. On the other side of things, defensively, I think it'll really help against teams that want to go tempo, because you'll be able to get that call in quickly. The whoever the quarterback of the defense is, probably a linebacker, will be able to relay that information quickly to his teammates. I think it streamlines communication. It speeds up the ability to communicate. It does away with all of the gimmicky sideline crap that we've seen that's so annoying, at least to me. Maybe other people like it. I just think it's dumb. So I'm a big fan of the streamlined communication, of the in-helmet communication stuff for college football. I mean, high school was using it already. College football has been so far behind when it comes to technology in the sport that this was a much needed move, and I think it'll work out well. I think it'll work out well for TCU. Let's move on to some baseball questions. Ultimate Frog had a handful here. Let's start with this one. How much of the baseball roster will turn over? Well, to give you some insight into this year, TCU added 22 new faces. If you know how many people are on a baseball roster for college, that's 40. You're allowed 40 roster spots. TCU added 22 new faces. So a little over 50% of the roster turned over last season. There was a bigger class of draft prospects for TCU last year than maybe there is this year, so that's part of it. And there was a pretty large graduating class as well for TCU by maybe recent standards. A lot of graduate transfers that came in, a lot of last year transfers that came in, right? So Sam Stoutenborough, one of those kind of guys who is a guy that didn't get drafted, but was a major producer for this team last year, was a grad transfer from Cal. He was a one and done because of that. You don't have as much of that this year as you did a season ago, but you also have maybe a smaller draft class than you did a season ago as well. Some guys will probably not be back. We'll hit the portal. That happens every year with TCU. It happens less that TCU has outgoing guys for portal reasons than it does at other schools. I think that's a testament to how well the coaching staff evaluates high school and portal talent. I think they've only had, 3, maybe 4 guys transfer out of the program over the last 2 years. There have been a lot of guys going to the draft, a lot of guys going pro, a lot of guys graduating. I think 1 or 2 players have maybe medically retired, so that's a whole different kind of circumstance. But they don't lose a ton of guys to the portal. It's a testament to the evals. Like I said, it's also a testament to TCU's brand from a baseball perspective, that this is a destination, not a stepping stone baseball school. And so I don't foresee the turnover being as great next year as it is, as it was this past offseason. But it could be wrong, right? I mean, just looking at the roster right now, you've got 4 guys who are grad transfers: Chatagnier, Dallin Leach, Colt Taylor, Zach Morris. So all those guys out of eligibility. You've got Curtis Byrne, a 5th-year senior, who's out of eligibility. Luke Boyers, a graduating senior. Hunter Hodges, Ben Hampton, all seniors. So that's 8 right there that you're probably not getting back because they're out of eligibility next year. I think maybe 1 or 2 of those guys still has a year left. I'm not sure on Hampton and Hodges, but the reality is that at least 6 of those guys probably aren't going to be on the roster next year. Then you get into draft talent. Anthony Silva is, a draft-eligible sophomore. I know that he hasn't had the season that he has wanted to have, but he's still highly regarded as an MLB prospect, and I would be wildly surprised if he was back next year. Haven't had a conversation with him about it. Haven't talked to anybody about it. That's just my gut instinct, is that I have a strong suspicion that he will go, and that comes with the fact on the beginning end of his career is that he withdrew his name from the MLB draft to come to TCU and give TCU 2 good years of production and be a Horned Frog, and I think that says a lot about Anthony Silva. He does have, and I think, let's see, A.S. Myers asks this down the road here. Any chance at all Silva decides to stay for one more year? I guess I'm kind of getting into that. Would love to see him overlap with his brother. Yeah, Silva does have a younger brother who's coming to TCU next year as part of this incoming class. He's a catcher, really talented kid in his own right. I know that there's a family draw and maybe a bounce back year draw appeal to coming back to TCU for another year. But the reality is, as a draft eligible sophomore, his leverage is never going to be greater than it is after this season. He's still, I see him mocked in the second round right now. And I don't see a guy passing up on that to come back. Crazier things have happened, right? Crazier things have happened, but that's just kind of where I am with that. As far as the rest of the roster goes, I think we'll see some more guys that are draft eligible test those waters. Peyton Tolle is one who, a couple scouts that I've talked to recently, he is flying up draft boards as far as being a pitcher is concerned. I talked about this in the offseason. Peyton Tolle coming in and being a two-way player, the emphasis was on the bat, right? And you were getting an arm that could probably be a weekend guy, midweek starter maybe, or a late inning guy on the weekends. And he has been really the inverse of that. He's been the best pitcher TCU's had this season. Hasn't made it work with the bat yet. And obviously the runway's getting a lot shorter on that as we're 3/4 of the way through the season now. But I don't think there's any doubt that Peyton Tolle is one of those guys that pro teams are looking at, scouts are looking at as a guy who can come in and contribute with his arm at this point. And so there's a guy to look at as well. And then you look at the rest of the junior class and you say, yeah, there's a lot of potential there. Coyer is a guy who I think might get some looks. If Kyle Ayers hadn't gotten hurt, he would be another one. But you look at the sophomore class, who most of which isn't draft eligible anyways, and then some of these juniors, and you can see a good number of those guys coming back. I think it'll be a lighter portal year for TCU than it was a season ago, but hey, in this day and age, anything can happen. Ultimate Frog also asks about Carson Bowen. His season has been really a strange one to track, because if you look at his numbers on the surface, I think it's a natural question to ask, oh my gosh, what happened? Like his batting average is down almost 120 points from last season. He was a 350 hitter as a true freshman. He's hitting 233 right now. But when you put it in context of, this is a kid that missed all of fall camp because he had surgery on his arm. And then he had a hamate bone issue. The day he got back, the day he was cleared from his arm to fully participate in practice, hurt his hand. So he missed all of fall and most of January, healing up from some off-season stuff that he was dealing with. And I was talking to someone the other day about his swing, because I think a lot of people have noticed a kind of a difference in his swing this year. And I think the reality is that he's learning how to swing healthy again. He doesn't feel any pain. I think he was more banged up in 2023 than people realized, because the guy's been playing baseball and catching for 10 years, 12 years of his life, pretty much nonstop, year over year over year. And now that he had this surgery in the fall, I think he finally feels right every time he swings. And it can be, as weird as that sounds, an adjustment period to feel good when you swing. And then, your mechanics might change a little bit. I know that he and Bruce have been working on that a lot this year. But the reality is, too, on the surface, while you say, oh, okay, he's not having a great year, I'm curious about what happened, you go and you look at some of his advanced stats, and you realize pretty quickly that he's hitting more line drives than anybody else on the roster, more hard hit baseballs than anybody else on the roster. He is beyond just the adjustment to newfound health. He is also, hitting the ball hard and getting incredibly unlucky at times. His batted ball stats this year, I was just pulling it up. That's why you probably heard me clicking. His line drive rate is 24%, which is up about 2 full percentage points from last year. His ground ball rate is down 16% from last year. And so, I mean, he's hitting the ball in the air. He's hitting the ball hard in the air more frequently than he was a year ago when he hit 350. His BABIP, his batted balls in play, is almost 160 points lower than it was a year ago. He's getting wildly unlucky when he puts the ball in play. He had a couple balls hit at Texas. One was 105 off the bat, right at the shortstop. One was 107 off the bat with a launch angle that would have made it a home run in every single major league ballpark. That was a fly out because of the weather. And then he had another line drive that would have been a single up the middle that the pitcher caught. Right, he's getting wildly unlucky with some of his at bats right now with the contact that he's making. And then he comes out on Tuesday against DBU. He hits like a 60 mile an hour ground ball that sees its way through for a single. He hits a 71 mile an hour soft line drive that falls for a single. And so I think the concerns about Bowen this year are a little overblown simply because he's hitting the ball hard. His batted ball stats are all really, really good. He's getting unlucky. He hasn't hit off speed stuff the way that he did last year. That part is true. But I mean, like his walk to strikeout rate is essentially the same. I mean, all of his batted ball stats look really good. I don't think Carson Bowen is having as bad of a year as maybe it looks like on paper at first glance. I get to add one player to the baseball team. This is from Ultimate as well. Preston Morrison, Matt Perk, Brian Holiday, or Luken Baker. I can only add one. As much as I love Brian Holiday, he and I played baseball together growing up. Great dude. In my estimation, the best, if not one of the best, two catchers ever to come through the program. I like the setup at catcher with Curtis and Carson right now. I think one of the challenges that this team has from a hitting perspective is the lack of power, which is surprising to me considering what I saw from this team in the fall, the way that these guys talked about, how much they were going to hit for power this year. I saw the results in the fall, and it just hasn't borne out on paper. I think they've got 26 home runs so far this year. I would probably go with Luken Baker. I probably would. Just to give you that threat in the middle of the lineup. And maybe if you put Luken Baker right behind Peyton Tolley sees a lot more fastballs because they're going to try and get him out a little bit more. But yeah, I think I'm going with Luken there. As crazy as it seems, because I mean, Perk and Morrison. I mean, you're talking about two of the best arms ever to come through the program. I like where the pitching is, though. I honestly do. I think they've got enough pitching-wise. I would like to see Luken Baker on this team. That's who I'm going with. Let's see. My recording cut out, so if the Carson Bowen question was a little bit wonky there, that's why. Is I had to restart the recording. A.S. Myers with another question as well. Any news on updated uniforms for any sports? Will we wear the Ranas Cornudas baseball fits more than once? I think the plan for the new Cornudas uniforms, which look phenomenal, by the way, absolutely phenomenal, is just to wear them for Sunday. I don't know that there's a plan to wear them more than once this year. Maybe that's a year-over-year thing. I don't know. But right now I think the plan is just for Sunday against Kansas State. That's the only time that those are going to be worn by the team. Leo Ladd, is Peyton Tolley ever going to bat again? I hope so. He's still taking BP every day. I got down to Austin on Sunday in time to watch the Frogs take BP, and Tolley, I mean, he hit the ball harder than anyone else in batting practice. I'll say that. He had a home run in those wind conditions in Austin, and we saw the weird things that the ball was doing in the air all weekend long down there. And so I think he's swinging the bat well in BP. How do you get that to translate into a game? And do you want to disrupt what he's been doing on Friday nights? I don't know. That's a hard question. That's why Saarloos and Bruce and everybody else get paid what they get paid, is to make those choices, because it's not an easy one. And I know that Tolley, if he had his way, he'd be swinging the bat every day, right? He'd be in that lineup every single day if it was up to him. I think there's a chance that we see Peyton Tolley swing the bat again. But at this point in the year, you found an equation that leads to really good pitching results, and that has solidified your weekend rotation to an extent. You know what you're getting from Peyton Tolley on Friday night, and that allows other guys to kind of slot in behind him, whether that's in the bullpen or in the rotation, whatever it might be. He decreases the chaos that around this pitching staff with how he's performing, and I don't know how much you want to rock that boat right now. Moving on to hoops, we got one question from Farm Frog. Farm Frog asks, what are the players we might be after if we don't get Cross? It's a great question. I know that TCU has a couple of open scholarships left. They've added what I think are 3 really great players from the transfer portal, and Frankie Collins, Noah Reynolds, and Brendan Wenzel. I think all 3 of those guys are great additions. All 3 of those guys slot in as starters on this team. Wenzel especially gives you a little bit more stretch at the 4 than what you probably had last year, even with Emmanuel Miller shooting 38% from 3. Wenzel is a more capable ball handler, I think, right now than E-Man was at this point in his career, which was his junior year, so last year. Ball screen guy, he's 6'7", athletic. You get a lot from Wenzel as far as ability to create, which I don't think TCU has had in a big man at that level. So I'm excited about that. How that bears out on defense, I'm not sure. He's a great rebounder too, though. I think he pulled down a little over 5 rebounds a game, almost 6 rebounds a game last year for Wyoming. So you're getting 3 guys in. I think I mentioned this on the board. TCU hosted Khalif Battle earlier this week, the Arkansas transfer, who, you look at his stats and you're like, oh, cool, 14.5 points a game, a little over 3 rebounds a game. So he only started, a third of the games this year. You go back and look at his last 9 games for Arkansas. Go look at his numbers. Go watch some film. This dude is a scorer. This guy is a 6'5" wing guard who, at will at times in the last 10 games. He started the last 9, I think, for Arkansas, and he averaged almost 27 points a game in those 9 games. He dropped 42 on Mississippi State's head, I believe. I think it was Mississippi State. But he had a 3-game stretch where he scored 42, 36, and 34. It would be a phenomenal addition for TCU. I know Kansas State is probably the leader there right now. I would much rather see TCU have him on the roster than have to play him a couple times next season. I will say that about Khalif Battle. He's a phenomenal player. Matt Cross, the kid from UMass, another big body. I haven't heard too many names beyond Cross. I know Porter, the kid out of Pepperdine, was another big man that they were looking at, that they've had conversations with. There are a couple guys who maybe haven't hit the portal yet. They like to keep 2 of those scholarships open for the potential of a late ad. So if there's a guy who, he's got until May 1st, so if he hasn't hit the portal yet but might do so over the weekend or early next week, I think TCU is going to kind of play it slow and look for some guys who hit the portal. I think there was a UNC Wilmington guy that hit the portal on Thursday morning that might be of interest. He's from Mansfield. So keep an eye on that as well. But I will say this, while I don't have as many names as you guys might want, I do know that they're looking for bigs that can shoot, a lot of wing guys that can space the floor. I think with the guards that they've got in, especially Collins and Reynolds, these guys are really great off ball screens. You've got a big athletic center in Ernest Uday, who you hope takes a major step forward this upcoming season. So if you're running a lot of ball screen action, you want to spread out. You want to keep the paint pretty clean, so guys have the chance to get to the rim. If defense collapses on you, you have opportunities with shooters in the corners or on the wings to get some shots up from 3. Brendan Wenzel fits that mold incredibly well for what TCU wants to do offensively this upcoming year. And so I wouldn't be shocked if they found another shooter in that same vein who could produce outside while also being a big presence inside defensively and a capable rebounder. So kind of keep an eye on that. I think that's kind of where TCU goes as far as philosophy for the portal. So if you see a guy in the portal and he's like 36 to 38% free throw. God, no. 36 to 38% 3-point shooter, maybe even a little bit better, bigger body, 6'6 to 6'8, with some good rebounding numbers. You can probably bet the TCU is looking at him. You can probably bet the TCU is looking at him. All right, that's the last question. Thanks to everybody that submitted questions for the podcast. Again, thanks to Dave Campbell's Texas Football and Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods for their support of the show and their partnership with us over here at Frogs Insider. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Go and check out the YouTube channel as well. Melissa and I will be back next week talking about TCU's weekend baseball series against Kansas State. We'll have spring game to break down for football. We might have more basketball news either on the men's or the women's front. We didn't talk about any women's hoops today, but we'll talk about it definitely when Melissa's back on the show. Very excited about this time of year for TCU athletics because it's one where you can get your hopes up quite a bit. And how those hopes bear out when the season plays, who knows? But that's for another conversation, another day. Right now, we're just being hopeful. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next week. Go Frogs.